This is my new personal PC, and you'll be surprised to learn how much I actually paid for some of the parts inside this thing, which we will go over in just a moment. But first, let's start with the case. Now you might be saying, hey random guy on the internet, isn't that a Cooler Master NR200P MAX case? Doesn't that retail for like $400 some or something? And to that I would say yes. Yes it does. But what if we bought one used? See, when this case first came out, I fell in love with it. I wanted one so bad, but the price was just too high for me. And as time went on, the price just kept creeping up and up and up and up. So I started to watch eBay and Craigslist for my area. And eventually I came across this deal here, which didn't look the greatest. You know, from the pictures, I could tell there were some imperfections, and there are some imperfections with this case, which I will show you in a moment, but it did have a return policy and the seller looked to be fairly reputable. So I decided to give it a go. And so about a week later, my case came in the mail, and it's not perfect. There is a scratch here, as you can see on the front. The glass looks to be in pretty good shape. It still had the plastic on it when it came. It actually came with the power supply and the AIO cooler. Now the AIO cooler, as you can see here, looked a little rough, and I haven't tested it yet, to be honest. But I did test the power supply, which worked fine. And since I already had a Corsair SF750 SFX power supply I wanted to use, it was great. So I was able to resell that Cooler Master power supply and use my existing power supply that I was already planning on using. Instead of using the AIO that came with this case, I actually had, from an RMA that I had done before, I had a BeQuiet 280mm AIO that I was already planning on using. And in case you're in the future, if you are looking at getting this AIO to go in this case, I would not recommend it. As you can see here, this pump thing, this big dumb pump, just gets in the way of everything. And if I had a bigger graphics card, like one of the 40 series, I don't think I'd be able to fit it. Whereas if I had an AIO that was just, you know, normal with the CPU pump in the actual CPU block instead of in the tubing, I think I would have been fine. But I managed to get everything to fit, and if I do end up upgrading to a better graphics card in the future, I probably will have to swap out this cooler. All right, let's move on to the platform that I went with. The platform that I did go with was a little older Ryzen 5000 series, and I am a big fan of value. What is the most performance that I can get for my dollar amount? And for me, that was the Ryzen 5800X non-3D. And with the holidays being around, you know, this time of year, you can find this thing for such a good deal, you know, sometimes lower than $200, especially if you look in the used market. And especially if you're gaming at 1440p like I am, the difference between the 5800X and the 5800X 3D is not all that much, just a couple of percent. But the price difference is huge, which, you know, is why I went with the 5800X. For the motherboard, I went with a Gigabyte B550i ITX motherboard, and I went with the Gigabyte B550i board mainly because it didn't have an onboard fan, and I find those to be annoying and kind of loud since I've had a couple other B550 boards, like the Asus board with that little tiny fan that goes on the VRM that gets to be, you know, kind of whiny. For the RAM, I went with 32 gigabytes of Corsair DDR4 3200 megatransfers per second. Now, I actually had an issue where I had a set of G.Skill Trident Z RGB Neo 3600 megatransfer per second RAM that just would not boot on this motherboard for whatever reason. And switching over to this Corsair 3200 speed did solve my issue. I did try dropping my G.Skill memory down to 3200 or 3000, and it just didn't seem to work for some reason. The memory was just a little bit finicky. But with the Corsair memory, I was fine. For the graphics card, I went with a used, I got this off of eBay, EVGA RTX 3080 for the Win 3. And I went with the 3080 because right now I think it is the best graphics card that you can buy for the money. You get the most performance for your dollar amount. Now, I will say that if you're looking at the newer 40 series and you want some of the new features that are in the 40 series, like frame generation, you know, DLSS 3.5, that kind of thing, I would suggest waiting until those come down in price, because right now there's just, you know, in my opinion, I think they're just too expensive unless you can find a good deal on one. Now, for the power supply, as I mentioned before, this is a Corsair SF750 Platinum unit. I've had this, You know, I bought this 2 or 3 years ago and it's been a great power supply. The main thing that I like about it the most is that the fan is really quiet and you can hardly ever hear it at all. And the sleeved cables that come with it are extremely nice and extremely pleasant to work with. Now, to be completely honest, since I've been using this system, since I've built in it, it's been great. You know, I really like the aesthetic, I like the vertical GPU, I like the glass side panel, but if I was gonna recommend something to my past self, I would say just go with the regular, well, case-wise, just go with the regular NR200 and, you know, swap between the glass or the vented side panel. I think the glass one, the NR200P non-max, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 to $120, and I would honestly recommend that because then you can just slap a big air cooler on your CPU. You don't have to worry about pumps dying, you know, you don't have to worry about AIOs, and I think personally it looks just as good. Another thing is I'm a big advocate of buying parts used. Using sites like eBay and Craigslist to buy my stuff. I would recommend shopping on eBay rather than Craigslist most of the time. Now, a couple of things for when you're shopping on eBay. Number one is if you're not sure about an item, make sure that it has a return policy. If it has a return policy and you have an issue with it, you are covered by eBay's money back guarantee. Number two, make sure that the seller that you're buying from has a very good feedback record. You know, they've been a part of eBay for a while, and they have good feedback scores and a good reputation. If you're shopping on Craigslist, I would recommend, you know, meeting the person that is selling the product that you are buying in a public place. I would recommend testing the product that you are, you know, looking at buying if you can. If it's like a graphics card, maybe bring your system, plug it in, test it out. If it's a case, of course, then you can be a little more lenient because it doesn't have parts in it that are, you know, liable to break and ruin your day. And I just thought I'd show you, this is my PC case that I was coming from before. This is a NZXT H1. This is the V1 edition that I had put a PCIe 4.0 riser in. And I had done a few little modifications, like snip off this little standoff here so that I could fit my graphics card a little easier. I actually got some frosted shower curtain like stuff that you put on glass, and I put it on the inside of this front glass piece here so that it, like, you know, has this frosted effect for when the computer was on. I thought it looked really nice. GPU temperatures in here I thought were actually pretty good, mainly because I bought this like 3D printed bracket thing here that I attached these three 40mm by 20mm Noctua fans to, that mounts like kind of like this in the back here, like that. There's a slot you can put it in here. I just attached it with some double-sided tape. And my GPU temps are great even without an undervolt. You know, I was like, you know, 75, 76C under full load in like heaven, for example. Which, you know, I really like this case, and I'm sad that I'm kind of sad that I can't use it anymore. The main reason for that is my AIO died, and I didn't really want to, you know, get a new one, and I was ready for a change. I had used this for, you know, like 2 years at this point. I had also swapped the fan from the kind of noisy NZXT fan over to this black Noctua fan, and I think I had it positioned as a intake. Actually, when, you know, most people recommend that you put it as an exhaust to help with the GPU temps. I had it as a intake, and I didn't find it to affect my, you know, GPU temps that much. One oddity that I did have with this case was that in most reviews that I watched, they're usually running a 15mm fan in the bottom of this case. You know, most people state that you can't fit a 25mm fan, which when I was putting my system together, I was able to fit two 25mm Noctua fans in here, which significantly dropped my GPU temperatures, by the way. From before I was, you know, 82, 83 degrees Celsius with no undervolt or anything. Now I'm, you know, 74, 75 degrees Celsius on the GPU, which is a big improvement, and I would highly recommend doing that. But yeah, I was able to fit them just fine, and I'm not sure why other people were not able to fit them. Maybe it's because they were using a bigger graphics card or something. I'm not sure. Maybe let me know in the comments below. So yeah, I'm really happy with this. Of course, hindsight is 2020, and I think if I could go back, I would just go with the regular NR200P. So yeah, if you have any questions, comments for me, you know, leave them in the comments down below. I will do my best to try and respond to as many of them as I can. Thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.